The 30-year mortgage is the most successful financial scam in human history. Most of you will spend your entire working life paying for a dream that was actually a political product launch in 1934 to save the banks from collapsing. You aren't buying a home. You're buying a $600,000 debt trap designed to keep you working until you're 70. Let's look at the math. Your realtor is terrified you'll find out. And before you say it, yes, I know. You've heard the rent versus buy argument your whole life. You've been told that renting is throwing money away, that ownership builds wealth, that a home is the foundation of the American dream. I'm not here to argue with that feeling. I'm here to show you who manufactured it, when they manufactured it, and exactly what it costs you. Because when you see the architecture of this thing, when you really see it, you will never look at a mortgage the same way again. This is not a debate about renting versus buying. This is a criminal investigation into a system, and the evidence has been hiding in plain sight for 90 years. Let's start before the trap existed, because that's where this story actually begins. Before 1934, if you wanted to buy a home in the United States, you went to a local bank or a savings institution, and you negotiated what was called a balloon mortgage. These loans ran 5 to 7 years. You paid interest during that period, and then at the end, the entire principal came due. All of it. At once. No 30-year runway, no gradual paydown. You either refinanced, paid it off, or you lost the property. And because of that structure, banks were careful. They required substantial down payments, often 50% or more, and they lent only to people with proven documented means to repay. What did that system produce? In 1930, the U.S. home ownership rate sat at 46%. Fewer than half of Americans owned the place they lived in. That was the baseline. That was the market before the government touched it. Then the Great Depression hit. Banks collapsed. Loans went into default by the millions. Foreclosures wiped out both homeowners and the lenders who'd issued the mortgages. The entire financial system was in free fall, and the Roosevelt administration needed a mechanism fast to stabilize it. So in 1934, the Federal Housing Administration was created, and with it came something that had never existed before in American finance: the 30-year fixed-rate, fully amortizing mortgage. Think about what that means for a moment. The government invented a new financial product, backed it with federal insurance, and pushed it into the market, not primarily to help families buy homes, but to stop banks from going under. The dream of homeownership wasn't discovered. It was engineered. It was a policy instrument disguised as an aspiration, and it was handed to you and called the American dream. How does a product go from government stabilization tool to cultural religion in less than a generation? That's what I want to show you next, because the answer involves a highway system, a returning army, and a man named Levitt building identical houses in a field on Long Island. Let's talk numbers, because this is where the trap becomes undeniable. Take a $400,000 mortgage at 7% interest over 30 years. That is not a hypothetical. That is roughly the median priced American home at current rates in 2024 and 2025. Your monthly payment comes to about $2,661. That feels manageable until you multiply it out. Over 30 years, you will make 360 payments, total amount paid, approximately $958,000. You borrowed $400,000. You will return nearly $1 million. That $558,000 difference is interest. That is the fee for the privilege of being allowed into the trap. But here is where it gets darker, because the raw total doesn't even tell you the most important part of the story. The way a mortgage is structured, through a process called amortization, means that your payments are not applied evenly to principal and interest across 30 years. They are deliberately weighted. In year one of your mortgage, you will pay approximately $27,000 in total payments. Of that $27,000, more than 90% goes to interest. You are building almost no equity. The bank is collecting almost everything. And you feel like a homeowner, but here's the part almost no one talks about. By the time you reach year 10, a decade into this commitment, you will have paid approximately $280,000 toward your mortgage. Of that $280,000, around $220,000 was interest. You have built roughly $60,000 in principal equity. $60,000 on a 10-year investment of nearly $300,000. That is not a real estate investment. That is an installment payment to a financial institution, dressed up in the language of ownership. This is called amortization front-loading, and it is not an accident. It is the mechanism by which banks guarantee they collect the bulk of their profit before you get the bulk of your equity. If you sell at year 5, because life happens, because jobs move, because families change, you will have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars and walked away with almost none of it as actual ownership. The math is designed this way. It was designed this way from the start. So now you know why your realtor doesn't run these numbers at the table. And you know why the question of renting versus buying is far more complicated than the industry wants you to believe. But who exactly built this machine? And how did they make sure it would keep running forever? What I'm about to show you is the moment the trap was legally locked in. In 1938, the federal government created Fannie Mae, the Federal National Mortgage Association. The official story is that Fannie Mae was created to make homeownership more accessible by providing liquidity to the mortgage market, and that is technically true. Here is what it actually means. Before Fannie Mae, when a bank issued you a mortgage, that bank held your loan. They were on the hook for 30 years. That meant they had every reason to be careful, to underwrite conservatively, to issue only the loans they were confident would be repaid. Fannie Mae changed that equation entirely. Now, banks could issue a mortgage, sell it immediately to Fannie Mae, collect a fee, and issue another one. The bank's risk evaporated. Their ability to generate new debt became, for practical purposes, unlimited. The trap didn't just exist, it could now replicate itself indefinitely. That's architect number 1, the government building the financial infrastructure that made mass mortgage debt not just possible but compulsory for modern life. Architect number 2, William Levitt. After World War II, the GI Bill gave returning soldiers access to federally guaranteed mortgages with zero down payment. The federal highway system connected cities to open land. And Levitt, a developer from New York, used both to build Levittown, a planned community of identical mass-produced houses on Long Island that became the template for American suburbia. 17,000 homes. Sold almost exclusively to white families with racially restrictive covenants, the suburban dream was not a natural migration. It was a federally subsidized product launch built on government credit, government roads, and a government mortgage system designed to channel an entire generation into 30-year debt. And it worked. Home ownership rates climbed from 46% in 1930 to over 60% by 1960. In 2 decades, a government financial instrument had reshaped how an entire nation understood where to live and what it meant to be successful. Architect number 3, the banks. Not individual banks acting independently. The banking system as a coordinated beneficiary of everything the government had built. Fannie Mae freed them from risk. Federal insurance backed their loans, and amortization front-loading guaranteed them maximum profit in the early years, before any borrower could build meaningful equity. The 3 architects, government, developers, and banks, did not conspire in a back room. They didn't need to. The system's incentives aligned perfectly, and they all got rich from the same structure. But the trap doesn't stop at the mortgage. What happens after you sign is a different kind of permanent. You signed the mortgage, you moved in, you believe the hard part is over, you are wrong. The costs that come after the purchase are where the trap becomes permanent, and they are costs that no one totals for you at the closing table. Start with property taxes. The average American homeowner pays $2,800 per year in property taxes. In many markets, New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, California, that number is $6,000, $8,000, $12,000 or more. And unlike your mortgage payment, property taxes do not stay fixed. Local governments reassess property values, and as home prices rise, which we are always told they will, your tax bill rises with them. You can pay off your mortgage completely. You will never pay off your property tax. It does not end. It is a permanent rental fee to the county for the right to stay in the house you supposedly own. Then there are HOAs. 74 million Americans currently live in communities governed by homeowners associations. The HOA has the authority to charge monthly fees, levy special assessments, enforce compliance costs, and in most states, to place a lien on your property and initiate foreclosure if you don't pay. You bought a home and acquired a second landlord, one you voted to accept in the fine print of the purchase agreement and can never fire. Add maintenance. Industry standard is 1 to 3% of your home's value every year in maintenance and repair costs. On a $400,000 home, that is $4,000 to $12,000 annually. The roof doesn't last 30 years. The HVAC doesn't last 30 years. The water heater, the windows, the plumbing, they all have a clock on them, and the clock is running at your expense. What you have is not ownership in any traditional sense of the word. What you have is what I'd call permanent conditional tenancy. You live there on the condition that you continue to pay. The mortgage, the taxes, the HOA, the maintenance, stop any one of them, and the property is no longer yours. And the system is perfectly designed to make those payments feel like personal responsibility rather than a structural trap. If this pattern sounds familiar, it should, because this isn't just about housing. Before I show you the modern version of this trap, let's talk about the people who built it. The original trap needed one generation to go mainstream. The modern version needed one financial crisis. When the 2008 crash happened, home prices fell sharply across the country. Millions of properties went into foreclosure. And institutional investors, private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, and large corporations recognized something that individual buyers couldn't see from the rubble. Distressed single-family homes were undervalued at scale, and if you bought them in bulk, you could rent them back to the families who'd just lost them. Between 2012 and 2024, institutional investors purchased an estimated 3 to 5 million single-family homes across the United States. Companies like Invitation Homes and Progress Residential built portfolios of tens of thousands of houses, the exact same type of houses that were marketed to the middle class as the foundation of generational wealth. The institutions didn't want to build wealth. They wanted to collect rent forever. This is why you can't afford a house. Not entirely, but it's a significant part of the answer to why housing affordability crisis stopped being an abstract concept and became a lived reality for an entire generation. You are not competing in a free market for housing. You are competing against entities with unlimited capital, algorithmic bidding systems, and zero emotional attachment to the outcome. And the supply side is just as locked. In cities like Los Angeles, San Jose, and Minneapolis, over 70% of all residential land is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. Zoning laws that were written decades ago, designed to preserve the suburban model, make it legally impossible to build the kind of density that would bring prices down. You cannot build apartments where only houses are allowed. And where only houses are allowed, prices stay high, and institutional investors have every reason to keep buying. Then there is the mortgage interest deduction, a tax break that has existed since 1913, which allows homeowners to deduct mortgage interest from their federal taxable income. In 2023, this deduction cost the federal government approximately $30 billion in foregone revenue. And who benefits most? Not the first-time buyer with a modest loan. The deduction scales with the size of your mortgage, which means the largest benefit flows to the highest earners with the biggest loans. It is a government subsidy for the already wealthy, paid for by everyone, that makes the market even less accessible to the people who most need it. The why you can't afford a house conversation almost never includes this. It should. The rent versus by 2026 calculation isn't just about interest rates and home prices. It's about a market architecture that has been systematically built to benefit every participant except the buyer. Here is the argument that holds the whole trap together. Home values go up. Real estate is an investment. Equity is wealth. You are building something, and that argument, more than any other piece of this system, is what keeps people inside it. And here's the part the institutions are counting on you, never calculating. Robert Shiller is a Nobel Prize-winning economist at Yale. He spent decades tracking the inflation-adjusted returns on residential real estate across the United States, going all the way back to 1915. His finding, over that 100-year span, the average real return on American residential real estate, adjusted for inflation, was just under 1% per year. 1%, not 10%, not 5%. 1. Now let's run that against the cost stack we've already documented. If your home earns 1% real return annually, but you are paying property taxes that rise with the market, HOA fees that increase over time, and 1 to 3% of the home's value in maintenance every year, you are not building wealth. You are running a deficit dressed up as an asset. And then there's the equity problem itself. Even if your home does appreciate in nominal terms, the equity you've built is illiquid. You cannot rebalance it. You cannot spend it without either selling the house, triggering 6 to 10% in closing costs, or taking out a home equity line of credit and paying interest to access your own theoretical wealth. The asset exists on paper. The cash does not exist in your hand. Trapped equity is not wealth. It is the appearance of wealth, denominated in a currency you cannot use. Compare that to what the same dollars would do invested elsewhere, in an index fund, in a diversified portfolio, where returns are liquid, rebalanceable, and not subject to a roof replacement every 20 years. The housing affordability crisis is not just that people can't get into the market. It's that the people already in the market may be less wealthy than they believe. And the mechanism designed to measure that wealth has every incentive to never tell them. The mortgage trap doesn't just capture you on the way in. It holds you by convincing you that the cage is an asset. So here is where we land. And I want to be precise about what I am and am not telling you. I am not telling you never to buy a home. I am not telling you that renting is always the right answer. The rent versus buying question is real, and it is personal, and it depends on factors that are specific to your life and your market. That is not what this investigation is about. What this investigation is about is the architecture. The system of the 30-year mortgage was not produced by market forces finding an equilibrium. It was built in 1934 by political actors responding to a banking crisis, and then expanded layer by layer through Fannie Mae, through the GI Bill, through zoning law, through the mortgage interest deduction, through institutional investor policy, into the structure you're trying to navigate today. Every time the trap needed reinforcing, someone reinforced it. Every time the cost of ownership needed to be obscured, it was obscured. The housing affordability crisis is not a failure of the market. It is the market working exactly as designed. A market designed to maximize debt duration, obscure the true cost of ownership, concentrate the upside with institutions and high earners, and keep the median buyer permanently leveraged. The 30-year mortgage is not the only trap in the system, but it is the foundational one, the one that makes every other trap possible. You were handed the system and told it was a dream. You were told that the trap was a ladder. You were told that the cage was freedom. And the most elegant part of the design is that it convinces you to defend it, to tell anyone who questions it that they just don't understand how wealth works, that they're throwing money away by renting, that real estate always goes up. The system does not need enforcement. It has believers. That is not a market failure, that is market design. And now you've seen it,